Since our readings on the social contract, we had established the existence of rights and the way in which rights are taken to be the foundational piece that brought societies and governments into existence. Mill tries to clarify the relation between rights and government and the autonomy that the individual is still supposed to have in a liberal society. So we're going to understand liberal societies as those societies in which the individual and the individual only is seen as a agent, a possessor of rights, right? But as like, I remember moving to the US, and one of the first things that I thought was really peculiar was the fact that my students were talking about the self-made man and how you can pull yourself by the bootstraps, and how like in this society you are like you determine your destiny, right? Although that is shared to some extent with Mexican society, I would not say that I am my own person. I am in relation to the group in which I was formed, right? So liberal societies have this really strong based interest on protecting the individual, where there are other societies, communitarian societies, where that individual wouldn't exist and can't be understood if it is not in relation to the group, society, linguistic association, a spirit of the nation that they have, right? So Mill and Nussbaum in that way are part of this liberal rights, liberal society sort of discourse, where other people like David Ingram, Arundhati Roy, Carol Gold would be more talking about not liberal societies but communitarian societies, right? So Western ideas of rights are very much dominated by that idea that it is the individual who bears rights, and it's the individual's responsibility to define what they ought to do. Although Martha Nussbaum belongs to that tradition, in Capabilities in Human Rights, she and Sen are trying to create this basis for analysis of the way in which a society and a government work that can be used in liberal and communitarian societies. I'll claim at the end of the lecture that I don't think that she does a good job in it, but it's also not something that is totally pertinent to the way in which we're doing this social and political philosophy class. I'm also only going to talk about what the capabilities approach is. So you're going to see that in the lecture I don't talk a lot about her response to Nozick and Rawls. They are very important philosophers, but we're not, because they need a considerably deeper understanding of philosophical basis. We're not talking about Rawls or Nozick, right? But I do want to use Nussbaum's capabilities approach in class because it does open up the door for other considerations of what it means to lead a good life. What does it mean to feel fulfilled in society? What would it take to undo those effects of which Hegel, Freud, and Marx talked about in the other chapter, or the other module, sorry, while at the same time embracing some of the legacies that we have had in liberal societies from the social contract theorist, right? So Martha Nussbaum is the only one philosopher we have covered so far who is still alive. She lives in Chicago, although she's not usually in Chicago. She travels a lot between Finland and India because she is carrying on projects there. She is a professor at the University of Chicago, and she has an appointment that I would totally die for. She works for the classics department, the divinity school, and the political science department in conjunction with the philosophy department and the school of law. So her work has always been very interdisciplinary, which makes it really translatable to various disciplines, right? And the work that she has done, for example, at the as a research advisor for the World Institute for Development in Helsinki, highlights that interconnectivity that her work brings. She has also worked for the UN and several other institutions for the past 20, 30 years. She has received like more than 40 honorary doctorates within the US and outside the US. She works in India with Rabindranath Tagore's, I think it's his granddaughter, in trying to find new models for education that are actually competitive in a global society, and not competitive as in productive, but competitive as in transformative, of creating citizens that are actually aware of the complexities that globalization brings with them. She is influenced in her interdisciplinary studies by Aristotle, and we'll see how she uses Aristotle in the capabilities approach. And she has like she's been really productive in the past like 30 years. This is only a list of the books she has that I've read. There are books that she has that I haven't read, and obviously there's a last one, Emotions, Why Love Matters for Justice. She is working on that topic right now. So I usually tell you who the philosophers have influenced, right, and who their influences are. So Martha Nussbaum is definitely influenced by an Aristotelian approach, also sort of a feminist basis. She went to college as an English and philosophy double major. So she's always had this interest in combining different areas of knowledge into the creation or assessment of models that would allow us to live better. And the reason why I find her very interesting is that she has been totally influential in the kind of work that I do, mainly because I disagree with her. Not in the capabilities approach as much as in her takes on narratives and the use of literature. In moral philosophy or ethics, right? So these two books, that's why I'm curious about this one. But I think she is a very interesting and thorough philosopher, and the way in which she uses technology, literature, and globalization in her approaches are usually pointing out how the world has become more interconnected in recent years. So it is all this background that she brings in when she talks about capabilities and human rights. And just in order to be like a little bit gossipy, I would mention this in class, I'm sure. She was married to Amartya Sen. So Amartya Sen is the other person that she mentions in her essay that has like a really great take on the capabilities approach. They were married for a really short time, but I always think it's interesting that they connected as a couple in that intellectual ground, and it was that intellectual ground that kept them together or keeps them together. They still work together, although as a couple they couldn't solve their differences. So anyway, capabilities and human rights begins this way, right? Obviously, rights are important for governments and international agencies. We talk about how this country has rights and how that country should have these other rights and how our rights ought to be defended. So the language of rights definitely has this idea that she says like, is the language of rights that is standardly preferred. We immediately use the word rights as if it were an axiomatic statement. If I say that I have a right, I immediately have a right. And that's one of the things that actually makes rights complicated, which is what she keeps arguing in this essay, right? The language of rights has a moral resonance that makes it hard to avoid it in contemporary political discourse. Everyone talks about rights, but there are a few people who understand what it actually means, what it takes to say that we have a right to bear arms, that women have a right to decide on their bodies, that animals have rights, that we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or that when dreamers are asking for be more participatory, be more included in this society, they are making this argument on the basis of rights. So there has to be this understanding that rights are some matter, some issue that somehow can be actionable, that somehow can be seen, that somebody can be somehow can be explained, right? So Newsroom says that because rights are so um, used in rhetorical as a rhetorical device even, or everybody talks about rights, we seem to lose track of the idea that rights are of a certain kind and that there are people who think of rights in different ways. So she mentions that the natural rights theorists, who are the ones that are going to come out of social contract theory, like Locke or Hobbes or even Rousseau, think that we have rights because we have, as human beings, we have rationality and language. So as long as somebody can demonstrate that we have rationality and language, or that they have rationality and language, they are guaranteed to have some rights. Nussbaum talks about how that view is in tension right now with the idea that is a sentient being is the one who has a claim to rights. So a sentient being can be a baby, it can be an animal, right? It can be a fetus, whereas rationality and language would exclude those people from being natural bearers of rights. So there is a discussion when we talk about natural rights theory, or when we talk about rights, most of us are talking about rights as if it were an umbrella term, not realizing that there are, at least so far, these two differences. Either we have rights because we have rationality and language, or we have rights because we are sentient beings. Within the natural rights theory, human rights always exist, right? It is a matter of who gets to claim them and who gets to enforce them. Because we have something like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that it sounds like fantastic, but we have a lot of countries that have signed, that have subscribed to it, but they do not apply it. So, what does that mean about human rights? If they only exist because they have been stipulated, does anyone ever get to enjoy them, right? The other bracket that she opens up is that natural rights can be thought as artifacts of the state, right? And things that the state can declare that we have. So as long as you belong to a state can recognize your human rights. But what if I am not a member of that state? What if I don't have citizenship, or I don't even have a legally permanent presence in the country. Does that mean that I don't have rights and therefore people can threaten me, people can be violent towards me, that I cannot express who I truly am? So these are some of the reasons why Newsroom thinks that talking about rights, it's actually more problematic than helpful, right? When we talk about rights, we have a question mark at the end of it, or we should have a question mark at the end of that expression of rights. And I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second.